So Kraylin asks for some assistance with a formula. He has a data set and it contains an ID, a date, and an attendance indicator. So we have multiple events at certain dates, and then each user can attend one or multiple events, and then we are keeping track if they attended or not. Now the possibilities are they are either attending, or they did not attend, or they cancelled, or the event is still to be held and so it is to be attended. Now Kraylin wants to send an alert to his users if they were not present in the previous two events. So if they during the previous two events cancelled or did not attend, then we are going to send an alert to them. So we're going to put a flag that says yes or no if we want to send an alert to them. Now there are two difficulties within this project. First of all is that we cannot assume that our data is sorted according to the date. So the most recent event is not necessarily listed all the way at the top. So that's something that we will have to work with. Secondly, Kraylin only wants such an indicator of yes or no at the event that has the latest date, so either in the future or the most recent event. So we don't want to put an alert at every single row, only at the date of the last event for a certain user. Okay, so with those challenges, I recreate the Excel sheet and I suppose you can get started. So the first thing I want to determine if we need to put an alert in a certain row or not, right? So do we need to leave the row blank, or do we need to put a yes or no? That is what I first wish to determine. So how are we going to determine? Well, we are going to take all of the dates matching the current row's user ID. So in this case, we're looking at the ID 1. And so we want to take all of the dates that match this ID. And then we are going to look if the current row's date actually matches the last or the most recent date here in all of the dates that matches the current ID. And so if that's the case, then we know we have to put an alert, otherwise we don't. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, we are going to have to use a filter that only gives us the dates matching the current row's ID. So let's do that. We are going to use a filter. And so what do we wish to return? Well, that's the dates. So we select the entire column of dates. But we're not looking to get all of the dates. We want to apply a filter to it. So only a certain subset of these dates are returned. And so the filter will be that we are going to take a look at the entire ID column, and we only want those dates where the ID column matches the current row's ID. So column A matches cell A2. Now I close the parentheses. This will work. So if I press enter, you can see we get back all of the dates matching the current row's ID. So in this case, these 4 dates were returned. However, if we want to pull this through later on, we will run into some difficulties because the references to the ranges will also shift down. So to prevent this, we have to make these ranges absolute references by putting a $ in front of the letter and the number. We can do this with a shortcut F4. So that's what I'm doing right now. Now I do make sure that the reference to the current row cell actually remains relative. So we do not wish to fixate that, because if we pull through, we actually want this to change. So if I now press enter, we still have exactly the same result. Okay, very good. So next up, I want to take the maximum of these dates that were returned. So we get the most recent date. So we wrap this in a max function. Now what a max function does, will return the biggest number in a list of numbers that we have supplied it to. And it also works with dates because dates in Excel are just numbers, namely the number of days that have passed since the 1st of January 1900. So I wrap everything in a max function and press enter. And what you can see is that we get back the most recent date, or the date that's most furthest away in the future, right? In this case, it's the 4th of February 2024. And that is indeed the date that is the most in the future of the dates that were supplied. And now all we have to do is to check if this date actually matches the current row's date. So we say this max function equals to the current row's date. I press enter and you can see we get it true. Now I will pull this through, and so each time we can see true or false depending if we need to do a calculation or put an alert, meaning yes, no, or we don't need to put anything. Now to make this a little bit more clean, you can already put this in an if function, because what an if function does, it takes in a logical test as the first argument. And the only criteria of a logical test is that it is true or false. So that's exactly what we have just calculated. We have calculated a true or a false, meaning does this date of the current row, is that also the maximum date of all of the dates for this specific user? Okay, so the second argument of the if function is what needs to happen if we're getting a true. So in this case, we need to calculate something. So calculate is what I will put here. And if it's not true, we don't want to return anything at all. And so you can do this by putting two double quotation marks next to each other to indicate that we want to leave it blank. So I close the parentheses and I press enter. And now I pull this through. And now you can see most of these cells actually remain blank. There are only 5 cells where we actually need to perform the calculation. Okay. So now actually comes the most difficult part. We will have to replace this calculate part here with a function that's going to check if the 2 most recent attendances did not attend or cancelled for a specific user. Now we will of course need to use an if function to check this condition. But before we do so, I will construct my function to the side to make it a little bit easier for myself. Okay. So what am I looking to do? Well, I want to get back the attendances of a certain person. So let's do that first. So I'm looking to get back the attendances that is in column C. So I take these attendances. And then I want to include those attendances that match the current row's ID, right? So we've done this before. We take all of the IDs and we say it needs to be equal to the current row's ID. And we make sure to use absolute references for our ranges, so we can pull it through. I close the parentheses and press enter, and what we are getting is a list of attendances for the current user. Now, one thing we cannot assume is that these attendances are in order, right? So that was one of the obstacles we're facing, is that we are not 100% sure this list is sorted. And so we'll have to manually sort this, and that is something we can do with a sort function. So I will wrap this in a sort by function. And so what the sort by function allows us to do is to sort this array based on another array, right? So we want to sort these attendances. And so on what do we wish to sort it? Well, it is on the dates here. Now the problem is we cannot simply supply all of the dates. We need to supply an array that matches the attendances, right? So we only want 4 dates, right? Lucky us, we've done this before with a filter function. So we don't want all of the dates. We only want those dates that match the current user's ID of the current row. So we say, give us the dates where the ID matches the current row's ID. Once again, using absolute references to fix all of this. And so now we close the parentheses twice and we press on enter. And as you can see, now we've sorted these. Now, you have 2 options to sort something. You can either sort it ascendingly or descendingly. The default behavior is to sort something ascendingly, meaning we are starting at the oldest date. And you can see all we've basically done is switch this order. So we went from oldest to most recent. We actually want to take the inverse order. So that is the last or the third argument to the sort by function is the sort order. And so we're looking to sort descendingly, so we have the most recent ones at the top. And so for this, we use the -1 argument, which means we're sorting descendingly. Now, in essence, nothing much has changed, right? We've just taken these 4 attendances and we have sorted them. In this case, nothing has changed because they were already sorted, but like I mentioned earlier, we cannot assume that. Okay, so now we have gotten back all of the attendances for a certain user sorted based on the date. However, we're not really interested in all of these attendances. We are only really looking for the first 2 attendances. Those need to be either did not attend or cancelled if you need to put a yes. Okay, so we can use the index function to only take a certain row of an array. So in this case, we have an array of 4 rows. Let's say we only want to take the first element of this array. We can use an index function. So the first argument to the index function is the array of which we want to take something. And then the second argument is a row which we want to take. So let's say we want to take the second element. So then I write a 2 here, and then I close the parentheses. And what we're getting back is the attendance of the second most recent event, right? If I want to get the attendance of the most recent event, I will change the 2 to a 1. As you can see, that's to be attended, that is this event. While earlier we had this did not attend from this event. Okay, so now we have constructed a formula that allows us to take the attendance of a certain user sorted by how recent. And so this allows us to take the attendance, either the most recent or the second most recent attendance, depending on the last argument to our index function. So now we can take this function and put it inside of the other function. Okay, so I take everything besides the equal sign, I copy this and I remove this formula. Now I go back to my original formula here, where we were checking if we actually had to put a yes or a no. And now, right now we have put the word calculate. Well, we will replace the word calculate with the actual calculation. Now, what do we need to check? We need to use an if statement, right? Because we're going to check something, if something is true or not. So we use an if statement. And so an if statement has 3 arguments. The first one is a part that we're going to check. It's a logical test that either needs to equal true or false. Next up, we have whatever needs to happen if the logical test return true. So in this case, we want to put a yes or a y character. Now, if the test failed or was false, then we want to put a no character as such. So all we have to do now is to write the thing that we were going to test. And so what we need to test if the first 2 attendances for a certain user are did not attend and cancelled. Now, this is an AND condition, right? Because the first and the second must contain one of those 2 words, right? So that's why we are going to use an AND function, right? An AND function is we supply multiple logical tests to it, and it will return true only if all of the tests returned individually true, okay? So the first thing we want to check is that the most recent attendance contained either did not attend or cancelled. Now, as you can see, we have 2 options, right? So did not attend or cancelled. So if we want to check true 2 options and return true if either of those 2 options are true, then we want to use an OR function. And so an OR function works in a similar fashion as an AND function. Once again, you provide logical tests to it, but how it works is the OR function will return true if at least one of the logical tests returns true, as opposed to the AND function, which only returns true if all of them return true. Okay, so within the OR function, we are going to paste the formula we had earlier. And so what this formula allowed us to do is take the attendance for the most recent event. And what we want to do is check if this attendance equals did not attend. Okay, very good. Now, that was not the only option. It could have also been cancelled. So we go to the next argument in our OR function. So we supply the next logical test. Once again, we paste everything we've got, so this entire line, and then we are going to say, okay, does this equal cancelled? Okay. Now let's press enter and see what this gives us. So I press enter and we get a no. And actually what we're checking here is the first attendance, so the most recent attendance. Does this equal did not attend or cancelled? In this case, it did not, so that's why we're getting a no. However, our function is getting really complex, this formula that we're writing. So we will clean it up using a let function. What a let function allows us to do is to assign variables to certain parts of our formulas, and then we can simply reference the variable instead of having to write an entire formula. And you'll see that makes our formula a lot easier to read. So all I'm going to do is at the start, I write let, open parentheses, and all the way at the end, I put the closing parentheses. Okay, so now we will define the first variable. Now, there are many options here, but one thing that I'm noticing that is appearing a lot is that we are checking for the current row's ID. So I think that's a good candidate for a first variable. So I will call the first variable A. And so the name of the variable is this filter where we are only taking those instances where the current row's ID matches the ID. So that is this condition here where the ID equals the current row's ID. So I will put this here as a second argument to the let function, and I do a comma. And now I will press Alt Enter to go to a new line. This allows me to better structure my formula. Now, what is the cool part is that everywhere in our function where we are saying check if column ID equals our current row's ID, we can simply replace this with the variable A. So let's start by doing that. So we can replace this with the variable A. We're doing the same thing over here. So we're replacing this with the variable A as well. over here as well, over here as well, and over here as well. So as you can see, we've been able to clean up our formula a little bit more, but we can do even better. One thing that we're also repeating multiple times is filtering those dates that match the current row's ID. So that's what I will call B. So I go to the next line and I'll say, okay, variable B, that will equal this filter condition here, where we're saying filter and take the dates where condition A is true. And so condition A means where the ID matches the current row's ID. So I take this filter function, I copy it and I replace it with B, and I say, okay, B equals this filter of the date column where condition A is true, meaning take the dates where the current row's ID matches the ID. Okay, very good. So now everywhere where we're using this filter function with these exact arguments, we can replace that with B. So we've already done it here at max, and we can also do it over here. And we can also do it over here, just like that. One thing you might notice is that we can actually use variables that we defined earlier in new variables. So variable B actually contains a variable A. So that's perfectly valid. Okay, can we even go further? Yes, one thing we're repeating as well is this sort by part. So this sort by logic will be exactly the same whether we need to take the most recent attendance or the second most recent attendance. In both cases, we'll have to sort. So that will be our next variable. So I will copy this and replace it with the variable C. And then we will define a variable C. So I go to the next line with Alt Enter. So variable C will be this sort, right? So here we are sorting the attendances and we are sorting them based on the dates. And of course, we're only taking those attendances that match the current row's ID. And that's what we're doing in variable B, which we are using within variable C. And so the -1 refers to the fact that we're sorting descendingly, meaning the most recent attendance will be at the top. And so earlier we used to sort by here as well. So we can also replace this with the variable C. Okay, very good. We can even take the abstraction a little bit further, where we have this index function here. So we're taking the index, right? Meaning we're taking the first row of whichever was returned by the sort by function. You can actually take this and also put this as its own variable. So we'll call this a variable D. And then we're saying, okay, D, that equals this index function. And so then we can also replace this index function over here. Okay, well, I must agree that perhaps this last abstraction was not 100% necessary, because just taking one index function does not accomplish that much to abstract it away, but still, it could help to understand how things are flowing. Okay, so if I now press enter, you'll see nothing has changed, right? It's still saying no, and the formula still works, right? All we've done is cleaned up our code a little bit, put it into multiple lines so it's more easily readable, and we've assigned certain variables. Now do keep in mind, for my variables, ICOs A, B, C, and D, you can actually call this whatever you want. So preferably you take some more descriptive variables so it's easier to know what's going on. Okay, so where were we left? Well, remember where we were checking if the first and the second most recent attendance contained did not attend or cancelled? Well, what we've done so far, we're checking here in variable D if the most recent attendance was did not attend or cancelled, right? Now we also need to check what the second most recent attendance is. And so this is a new argument to our AND function. And so I will also put this on a new line like this. And so here, the second argument to the AND function, well, will be another OR function. So once again, we have two possibilities for the second most recent attendance. It could be did not attend, or it could be cancelled. Now, in this case, we also need to take the index of the sorted array that is in variable C. So variable C, that was a sorted array with the most recent attendances. And earlier we took the most recent attendance. Now we're taking the second most recent attendance. So that would be the index 2. We're taking the second most recent attendance. And so the second most recent attendance, it does need to equal did not attend. There we go. Now we also have a second possibility. And so then we go to the second argument of our OR function, where we are going to copy this index part. And so instead of being did not attend, it could also be cancelled. Like this. So then I replace the did not attend part with cancelled. As such. Now we can clean it a little bit more. So this index function, we could also give that its own variable. So I take this, Control C, and I replace this with variable E as such. And then I say, okay, variable E is this index where we take the second row, right? And so then I also can replace this with the variable E. Okay, that's the final product. We're only missing one more parentheses. We actually need to close down the logical AND function. So I will put my parentheses there. So we close the AND function, and we also end the first argument of our if function. One thing we've also forgotten is to put a comma here at the end of the index. So with the let function, you always have this pattern of a variable name and then a calculation, a variable name and a calculation. And at the end, you have one last calculation without a name. So now I press enter. Again, we get an end, so that's good. Now we are going to police this through and see what we're getting. Okay, so we can see it's still the same rows that contain an alert, so that's good. So the first one get a no. Why not? Well, because his latest event is still to be attended, so we are not going to send an alert. The next person, he is going to get an alert. Why? His two most recent events is these two. Well, they were either did not attend or cancelled. So then we go to the third person here. So he is not getting an alert. Why? His second most recent event, well, he actually attended that. So we don't want to bother him. We just are hoping that he will show up for our next event. Then we go to user number 4. So he is getting an alert. Why? His two most recent events, it's these two events, he actually did not attend or he canceled. So he gets an alert. And then we have user number 5. He is also getting an alert. And why is that the case? Well, his two most recent events, he also did not attend. Okay, so it works like a charm. Let's go over our function one last time so I can make sure that you're fully understanding what's actually going on. So this let function might seem super confusing, right? But it allows us to shorten our function quite a bit. So all it's doing is we have certain calculations and we assign it to variables, and then instead of having to write a calculation, we can just reference the variable. It's mostly used to remove too much redundancy in your formula. And so if you at some point need to change a part of your formula, you only need to change a variable and it will be okay in every instance where that variable is being referenced. Okay, so actually let's start here at the if, right? So this is the main function, and so we're doing a check. And what are we checking? Well, it's if we have to place an alert or not. How are we checking this? Well, we're looking at the current row's date, so that's this B2, and we're checking, does this equal to the maximum date that is associated with this user? And so that's what's happening in variable B here. So in variable B, we are taking those dates that match the current row's user, and that's in variable A. Okay, so if it matches, that means we need to put an alert. If it does not match, then we are not putting anything, and so that's what the double quotation marks mean. Okay, so we've established we need to put an alert. Then what happens? Well, we need to check what the alert should be. Should it be yes or no? We can do this check with an if function, but we have multiple options here. So there are two conditions that needs to be true in order to be a yes, that the person needs to be alerted. And so his most recent attendance must be did not attend or cancel, and his second most recent attendance must be did not attend or canceled, right? And so we've abstracted this away in the variables D and E, where we are taking the most recent or the second most recent attendance. Okay, and so this reference variable C, right? And so variable C is this sort function, and this sort function returned an array of attendances, and these attendances were sorted based on the dates of that person. And this -1 indicates that we're doing a descending sort, meaning the most recent attendances will be first. And then using the index function, we can take the first row and the second row for the most recent and second most recent attendance. And so these OR functions is because each attendance can either be did not attend or canceled. So both mean that the person was not there and we want to send an alert. I hope that makes this function a little bit more clear. It was not so easy to construct, but once you break it down and these separate steps that you need to take, it becomes a little bit more manageable.